Hello, Freshman Theology. Happy April 13th through the 19th week to you. I hope you had a great Easter weekend. I hope you had a good opportunity to be able to celebrate and reflect on everything that weekend is for us and for all people. With the good news of the empty tomb, that Jesus overcame the grave, that he's overcome death, that he's overcome any of the powers of sin and darkness and brokenness, and that he walks on in new life and invites all of us to be a part of that. So I hope that was something that you got to be able to find time to think through, reflect on, celebrate over the course of the last few days. As we move forward in this class now, we're going to then shift on and move on from the book of Leviticus and move into then our next book that follows Leviticus in the Old Testament, which is the book of Numbers. As we look into the book of Numbers, which will be about a 1.5-ish week study for us, as we look into Numbers, a couple things that I want to remind you of. Keep in mind that when we talk through the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which we give the title to of the Torah, which is the Hebrew word for law, big picture law. And again, we know that law biblically means instructions, guidelines, things God is giving to people to provide them with structure and things to do. Our first 5 books of the Old Testament constitute the Torah, and that's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, Genesis is very much like historical storytelling as far as its genre is concerned, talking through the details and story of God creating the earth and creating people, and then God inviting these first groupings of people into various covenants with God, which all usually revolve around taking care of the earth and taking care of the people around them. And by the time we get to the book of Exodus, though, this big family that God has ordained to be how all of the world is saved, this family and line of Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob and then Joseph. As God works through this line, the family of Joseph and the family of Jacob, who is renamed Israel, end up in Egypt. And it's after time goes on that this Israelite people group expand and become so large that they make the Pharaoh or the king of Egypt nervous. The Pharaoh enslaves this people group, and God then intervenes and breaks this people group free from the clutches of Egypt to then push them not just out of slavery, but then into a new reality and a new life as God's people, the people of Israel. Now, we looked at the book of Leviticus, which then kind of continue the theme that gets started in the 10 Commandments and Exodus, as this theme of God then giving instruction and details and structure to this people group. And we took some time last week to really sit into what the heart of Leviticus is all about. It's making sure that there is a way for the Israelites to be in community with God, with Yahweh. And the Day of Atonement was something that I had you take time to really kind of lean into understanding and responding to. This way that God makes for Israel to be able to atone for all of their sins and brokenness, to start over again and be completely clean and pure, to be able to then be in community with God, which is gospel right there. So when we get to Numbers then, the Israelites have these ways to be able to make sure that they are in community with God, and they then pack up their stuff and they work towards the promised land, towards Canaan. And so in Numbers, the 4th book of the Old Testament, we're going to see then a shift back towards that historical storytelling genre in which we learn about how the Israelites are in their shift and movement towards Canaan. So to do that, there's a couple chapters I'm going to have you all read this week. I have notes provided in the digital resources section as always for each of those chapters. But for this week, you are, over the course of the next few days, you are to read chapters 1, 11, 14, and 20. I believe that was the list. And as you read through those chapters, then I have notes for each of them just to talk through what's all happening. But what should kind of stand out to you is that as you go through these chapters, you're going to see details that are depicting Israelite brokenness, Israelites kind of slipping into the same mistakes over and over again. But just as the Israelites are consistent in their brokenness, you're going to see that God is consistent in faithfulness. Now, there are times in these chapters in which you're going to see God administer what seems to be like a consequence to the Israelites. And sometimes, just like when we're children and we get a consequence from our parents, there's times where those consequences feel harsh or feel very severe in the moment. I just want to remind you that anytime the Israelites reject God, what they are really big picture doing is they're breaking the covenant. And if the covenant with God is a contract, meaning there's two sides, anytime the Israelites break the covenant, God can freely then just leave Israel. God can, quote unquote, walk away. And yet God never does. God always, what we seem to see, God always kind of cuts out the things that were pulling the Israelites away to then renew the covenant and then show God's faithfulness and commitment to Israel, to the salvation of the entire world. So in these chapters, you're going to see some Israelite brokenness, and you're going to see consequences in which God is then going to say to certain groupings of the Israelites that they are not going to be able to enter the promised land. And yet God is still going to make a way to renew covenant and ensure Israelites will be in Canaan someday. So go through those chapters, go through the notes to reflect on that. Once you've done all of the notes and reading for this week, then your main activity for you to do and then submit by the end of the week is a response in which you're going to type 2 paragraphs responding to how these chapters of Numbers show Israelite brokenness and then how they show God's faithfulness. I'd like you to take a paragraph then on each of those kind of portions. So in your two paragraph typed response, paragraph 1 should be here's how in Numbers Israelite brokenness is on display. And make sure you're specific. Don't be too general, vague, or open-ended. It is a full paragraph. That should be 5 to 8 sentences to be a good academic paragraph. And in part 2, then a second paragraph in which you are detailed and specific and clear, talking through how God's faithfulness is seen in these chapters. That's going to provide for us then kind of a bit of like a here and there detailed walkthrough of Numbers to give us a good big picture overview of what's going on in this book with some specific stories for reference and example. So there's this video, there's the chapters to read, the notes to take, and the response to type and submit on turnitin.com. And that's what we have for you this week as we go through the book of Numbers. We'll wrap up Numbers next week and kind of go on into Deuteronomy as we keep working through these books of the Old Testament. But in the meantime, God's blessings to all of you on your week. May Christ's joy and peace be with you. And I look forward to kind of seeing your responses as you go through Numbers. God bless you guys.